Welcome to New Mexico Black Rifle Operators Union. I'm your host, Sean. Today, from AKOU and from several Mr. Guns and Gear, I'm going to talk about some sad news for AK guys. Zastava, if you don't know who Zastava is, they're the ones that make Yugoslavian AKs, or what are commonly known as Yugo AKs. They're going to be out of service for a while. It looks like they're going to fill their current orders for them. But Zastava is a Serbian plant now, so it's no longer Yugoslavian. But they have put a ban on export of their product. Zastava is actually a state-owned entity in Serbia. And because of the situation in the Balkans and because of what's happening in Ukraine right now, they have decided to keep all their weapons in-house so that if they're needed, they can be used there. Now, what does that mean for the AK community? Right now, Zastava is one of the most price-pointed, perfectly price-pointed AKs, or close to perfectly price-pointed AKs you can get on the market. The only one I would say that's better for the price point is probably PSA's AKs right now. Palmetto State Armory has a lifetime warranty on their AKs, and I would say they still have some teething issues on some of their AK products. I have some personal experience now with another example other than the one I have, and it had a front sight drum that's drifting, and I was trying to think of how I was going to say that without beating around the bush, but actually giving you exactly the right description. So a friend of mine has a Palmetto State AK, and it's a Gen 3, so it's better than the one I have, which is a Gen 2. But the front sight post drifts left and right both ways under recoil. And that means it needs to have the drum replaced. I think Palmetto had some problems early on with the Gen 3s, where they hadn't kept up to spec. The next one would be Zastava. Zastava was selling their AKs right around $700-800. Better than that, I would say, is the Mighty Wasser, so the Wasser 10. So it will impact the community, but it won't be that bad. So what is the claim to fame with a Zastava AK? They use a 1.5 millimeter thick receiver, which allows them to be more rigid, and they use the bulged trunnion, which is pretty indicative of RPKs. Now, that sucks that they're going away for a little while, at least until the situation settles in Ukraine and in the Balkans. And since they're a state-owned entity, they can come back to market when the state tells them they can. So we're down an AK manufacturer. What else did I see that was interesting in the 2A community? I can tell you personally, last weekend I got to see Indiana Jones. This weekend I went to go see The Sound of Freedom. And I'm not normally a movie guy, especially with newer genres or newer storylines, because they're not really new. They're not really interesting to me. Indiana Jones was pretty cool. I liked it. I didn't get the Mary Sue plot that everybody was talking about, and I damn sure didn't get a lot of woke vibes from it. I just kind of got stuck in the storyline. I think it was better than the Crystal Skull myself. The Sound of Freedom is a nut kick. It is one of those movies you're going to watch, and you're going to need to take a minute after you watch it, and maybe you're going to want to be alone for a little while. You can't see little kids being trafficked or hinted at traffic and then find out that the story is actually real. It isn't a QAnon conspiracy movie like they were saying. There's none of that stuff in there. If anything, it's kind of like what we knew was going on with Epstein and everyone else. But it's very realistic. You get some... they don't show child exploitation, thank God. But they imply it heavily. But that's key to the storyline. After all, this whole movie is about stopping a trafficking ring. Now, Disney wouldn't touch the movie because this movie is over a year old or 2 years old now. And it follows a real-life story of Tim Ballard. There we go. Tim Ballard, who actually broke up a child sex trafficking ring and brought 125 kids out of that trafficking ring. So it's very realistic. And in this, between the two movies, I actually noticed a lot of things about guns because, well, I'm a gun guy. There's a place in The Sound of Freedom where they're in Brazil, I think it is, or somewhere in Colombia. Looked like they were dealing with the FARC rebels. And the FARC guys are a rebel group in South America that have been kind of anti-establishment, kind of working with the cartels, doing bad stuff. And of course, what did they carry? Kalashnikovs. So what I noticed about their Kalashnikovs were they're Chinese, which seems pretty accurate for what they'd probably be able to have access to. The good guys, the guys that come in and rescue kids, they're carrying M4s. Well, because that's America's weapon of choice, and it wasn't Americans that actually rescued them in Cartagena. It was actually the CTI, which is the Colombian version of like our HIS or Homeland Security dudes. So the Indiana Jones movie is more interesting for firearms for me because it's set up in the 60s. For part of it, and part of it's a flashback to, the Nazi days. And you see the bad guys in Indiana Jones, even the ones in the 60s, using Walther PPK, or not Walther PPKs, not just Walther PPKs, but Walther P38s. And anyone who knows their history about guns knows that this is a Nazi-era gun. And the bad guys turn out to be Nazis. Spoiler alert there, but it's very cool. But it was one of those things, if you're a gun guy, you kind of know by the style of firearm that you see in movies that they're going to be a bad guy or a good guy. If you watch like John Wick, you're going to see him carry an HK pistol in the first one, a Glock pistol in the second one, I believe, and a staccato in the third and the fourth is what he carries most of the time, which is like a 2011. So it's based on the 1911. It's what cops carry. It's what the good guys in America would carry. If you look at the bad guys in John Wick, they're carrying SIG 5.52 or 5.56, I should say 5.56 patrol rifles that are shortened. They're the commando version of them. And that generally is what you see in movies as a bad guy gun. If you see, there's been several movies I've noticed that the guys are carrying SIG rifles and they're bad dudes. I think it was even in, what is it? Equalizer. The Equalizer, one of the first one or the second one, there was a couple guys running around with SIG rifles. And that usually is a indicator that they're a bad guy or they're carrying a Kalashnikov. It would be refreshing to see someone carrying, something that they built or they made or that was purpose-built for what they were doing. But that's not always the case, especially in movies, because they have to rent that from some collector who has enough weapons to do this stuff. Just weird ideas I had when I was watching these movies. The good guys in The Sound of Freedom are carrying Glock pistols, which I think is pretty indicative for South America for a lot of law enforcement agencies. Or Glocks. I would see them carrying both, honestly, because a Glock is still heavily favored in law enforcement circles. But Zastava going away is the big story. I have nothing else to give you about that other than just what the press release said, and it's exactly what I summarized for you. That until situations improve, they're keeping their weapons in-house. And as far as the other movies, or talking about the movies, just plugging movies, because I actually got out and got to see some and paid attention to the guns. Go figure. for a guy who's big into the 2A. Indiana Jones, I actually think it's hilarious that I don't see him carrying the Webley. I don't remember him carrying the Webley. He actually was carrying a 1911 and part of it. And that kind of makes sense. If you're an American, you wouldn't think you'd be carrying a Webley anyway. You'd be carrying a 1911 or, a Colt single action army is what I would think. But, movies were started the way they were, and he carried a Webley, and it gave him a good, different gun than the bad guys until later. There's several times you see Lugers in The Dial of Destiny. You see Walthers. You see MP40s. You see the plain Jane K98 Mausers. And PPKs. So one of the bad dude scientists carries a PPK, which is kind of indicative of Nazi officers or Nazi party officials. They would carry PPKs. They were gifted them by the party. So there's some historical relevance for you. And as far as the stuff in The Sounds of Freedom, I'm still kind of shaken by the movie, to be honest. It's just how it's very impactful. That's the best way to put it. I didn't get any of the press that they were putting out that was saying that this is a QAnon movie. Didn't get that. It's put out by Angel Studios, but it's not an overly heavily Christian movie. The only thing that I remember him saying, Jim Caviezel, is that America's children, or God's children are not up for sale. And that should be true everywhere. I think that's what has turned a lot of us from the left and woken us up, is to see what our society is doing right now when it comes to protecting and defending children, even what they are or how keeping their innocence, let's put it that way. There's a lot of people right now that are wanting them to go through really, really bad sex ed classes that really should be up to the parent, number one, to say when and if that ever comes down. And two, for age appropriateness, I'm thinking that type of talk that they're trying to have is senior year in high school. There's a book called This Book is Gay. And I've actually seen it on a desk two desks in the school districts when I used to work for them. And that book, if you actually got to look at it, there's a section where they actually talk about to kids how to get on Grindr. If you don't know what Grindr is, it's a gay version of Tinder. That shouldn't be okay for minors, period. To be on Tinder or Grindr. If they're minors, they have no business being on adult hookup site apps at all. And that feeds into what I was talking about with The Sound of Freedom. Where there's a definite schism in the world right now where you're seeing people validate or look past pedophilia in the guys that they don't want to be on the right or give the right a win when it's coming to kids. And that's horrifying, first off. It's also disgusting. That shows the level of hate they have for anyone who doesn't see how they see. They'd rather side with pedophiles or look past pedophilia than to allow you to see a story or actually hear the news from the story. The Rolling Stone magazine was the one that came out and said that The Sound of Freedom was a QAnon-addled film, and it's not. I got to see the press around it and decided I wanted to spend my Sunday afternoon in a movie theater because it's charting right now to beat Indiana Jones in a lot of areas. And I said before on another podcast that I run called Your Donut, You Eat It, that I was definitely going to see Indiana Jones. And after seeing Indiana Jones and going, okay, well, I saw that, let's see what this is, because, well, I don't have a lot going on right now other than writing and working in my business. And that's looking like it's going to pick up even more. So I hope you had a great weekend. Hope you got some range time. It's really hot in northwest New Mexico, over 100 degrees, so maybe you didn't. If you were smart like me, you kind of just stayed in the air conditioning, staying away from the range, to be honest. I think that BLM is shutting down shooting on BLM land right now because of the danger of starting fires. And it makes sense a little bit in that you see idiots all the time taking reactive targets out. And with the winds we've had, we're just egging on for a bad fire in New Mexico again. So enjoy your time, get some ice cream, and stay in the shade. Like, share, subscribe, be great.
I can't let it slide. My politics are rather controversial. Who would have thought that I ain't catching all slack?